In this video, we're going to go over cards which were only really good in Duel Links, and while they existed in the TCG, and probably saw play here and there, were nowhere near as good as they were in Duel Links. And at number 10, we have Invoked Cocytus. This is a fusion monster which can be summoned with Alistair the Invoker plus one water monster, and using Invocation allows you to use monsters from your graveyard for fusion summons, or even one from your opponent's graveyard. Seeing as Alistair the Invoker can search out Invocation on its summon, can return itself to your hand thanks to Invocation's graveyard effect, and even has a hand effect to boost the attack of your fusion monster, Alistair the Invoker has been incredibly powerful in Duel Links, which is no surprise because it's also powerful in regular Yu-Gi-Oh! However, out of all of the fusions that Alistair allows you to go into, Invoked Cocytus is not one that people would call one of the best in the TCG. In the TCG, the best invoked fusion is Invoked Macabre, since it's basically an ultimate providence on legs, and can just negate everything as long as you have cards in your hand to fuel its once per turn negate. And a couple of the other invoked monsters come out every now and then, but generally invoked decks will play at least one fusion of every attribute, just in case they need to banish a monster from their opponent's graveyard, or if they just situationally need the effect. Invoked Cocytus has the effect that it can't be destroyed or targeted by your opponent's card effects, and it can attack while it's in defense position, similar to Total Defense Shogun, where it just applies its attack for damage calculation. And with 2900 defense, that's kind of hard to beat over, especially since normal removal can't get rid of the card. Now, a high defense monster that can't be targeted or destroyed by card effects is not that big of a deal in the TCG. One of the best boss monsters, Red Eye's Dark Dragoon, has this effect in addition to targeted destruction and an Omni Negate, while having a higher attack than Invoked Cocytus' defense. And being easier to go into in more decks. It's almost funny to think that Invoked Cocytus is so strong in Duel Links that it's currently one of the very few banned cards in that game, because it's actually incredibly hard for the average deck to get over an Invoked Cocytus. In fact, it's really hard for the average deck to get over any card that can't be targeted by card effects. And adding Destruction Immunity on top of that is just kind of overpowered in that version of the game. So when they moved over the Invoked archetype, they did make sure to leave out Invoked Macabre and Invoked Ragin, since they're both incredibly strong fusion monsters for that game, but I don't think they really expected Invoked Cocytus to be as much of a problem as it turned out to be. However, since Invoked Cocytus did see play in the TCG, since it was technically included alongside Alistair engines, it's only the number 10 spot on this list, because it was nowhere near as impactful as it was in Duel Links. And at number 9, we have Windstorm of Etaqua. This is a trap card which simply has the effect to change all of your opponent's face-up monsters' battle positions. In the TCG, this card only saw play in the very early days, but even at its time of introduction in 2003, there were already better trap cards that could be used for its intended purpose, like Wabaku. And what Windstorm of Etaqua is really good at doing is stopping out entire battle phases. Although, while there are a lot of other trap cards which can do that as well, what makes Windstorm unique is the fact that there's no trigger on its activation. So if your opponent tries to blind destroy one of your back row spell and trap cards, you can just chain Windstorm of Etaqua to whatever's trying to destroy it in order to gain the effect anyway. And that's the real power of the card. You can't really stop it unless it's destroyed before it's a live target, or unless you negate its effect. And in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, while it's not on any of the banned lists, this card is only available at one copy because it's a level up reward from one of the characters, which is not repeatable. So for all intents and purposes, limited to one copy per deck, without being on their limited list. And it definitely sees competitive play and has kind of always seen some form of play throughout the history of Duel Links. However, in normal Yu-Gi-Oh! We have better cards like Wabaku and Threatening Roar as trap card options in order to stop out a battle phase that can be chained to destruction. However, stopping the battle phase in the TCG isn't even that big of a deal, because we also have Battle Fader and Swift Scarecrow, which are even better and can be activated from the hand, and haven't really seen play in meta decks in a couple of years. Although none of those powerful cards exist in Duel Links, which is why Windstorm of Etaqua has seen so much play. And at number 8, we have Super Rush Headlong. This is a quick play spell card which can be activated by targeting one face-up monster you control, and then declaring any one attribute. And your monster basically gains the effect for the rest of the turn, where if it attacks something with the same attribute as the one you declared, you can destroy that monster at the start of the damage step. So kind of like Ally of Justice Cataster's effect, except only for one attribute for one turn. And when Super Rush Headlong was first added to the TCG, it saw absolutely no play because it came out way late in the game in the middle of the Pendulum era, when granting one monster this kind of effect was not that big a deal. But in Duel Links when it first came out, it immediately started seeing competitive play. And while it doesn't see as much competitive play today as it did when it first came out, it has been a staple option you can always go into, because it has the same kind of protection as Windstorm of Etaqua, where you can just chain it to destruction to gain the effect of one of your monsters. And it also allows you to destroy monsters that can't be targeted by card effects, like Lunalight Saber Dancer or Obelisk the Tormentor. Although even with its usefulness for taking out target immune monsters, it still wasn't useful for taking out invoked Cocytus. But you can kinda see why that card was a problem, when Super Rush Headlong is one of the best options you have for getting rid of target immune monsters, besides Lightning Vortex of course. And at number 7, we have Head Judging. This is a continuous trap card which has the effect that when a monster on the field activates its effect, you can choose to make the player who's activating the effect toss a coin and call heads or tails. And if they call it incorrectly, that monster's activation is negated, and then you get to change control of that monster to their opponent. So basically, you use this in response to your opponent activating an effect, and then your opponent has a 50% chance for the effect to go off, and this card will then destroy itself, or have the effect negated and lose the monster permanently. And being able to steal one of your opponent's monsters and negate its effect at the same time is pretty strong. But since it's tied to a coin toss effect, no one plays this card in the TCG. However, in Duel Links, there was a competitive deck all about coin tosses. They had a skill where they needed to have a number of cards in their deck that had an effect to toss a coin. That way, their first 3 coin tosses in each duel would always land on heads. And so Head Judging was basically played to meet that limit, even if they didn't actually want Head Judging to be affected by that skill. So once you used up your first 3 heads on your coin tosses, that's when you would then use Head Judging in response to one of your opponent's effects. And then if you were lucky, and your opponent got it wrong, the amount of advantage you got from stealing one of your opponent's monsters is literally a +2. Especially since you can just use it again on your next turn. So it was incredibly powerful because it just happened to be needed in a deck to increase the amount of coin flip effects, and then it was situationally just a very strong card besides that. And if it wasn't for the skill forcing people to play this card, I'm sure it would have gone under the radar just like it did in the TCG. But it became such a problem that the card eventually got put on the semi-limited list in order to rein in the power level of coin flip decks, because they were actually incredibly strong. And the semi-limited list in Duel Links is way harsher than it is in the TCG, because in Duel Links, if a card is semi-limited, that means you can only have 2 copies of any card which is semi-limited in your deck. So take for example, Neos Fusion, another card which is semi-limited in Duel Links. You would only be able to play 1 copy of Neos Fusion and 1 copy of Head Judging in your deck, or 2 copies of either or. Whereas in the TCG, you would be able to play 2 copies of both of them in your deck. So just keep that in mind when I talk about all these other cards which are also semi-limited or on the limited list, because this rule does apply for cards that are limited to 1 copy, and even cards that are limited to 3 copies, which is a special distinction that only works in Duel Links. And at number 6, we have Koa'ki Meiru Maximus. This is a level 8 monster which can special summon itself from your hand by banishing 1 Iron Core of Koa'ki Meiru from your hand. And while this card is on the field, it has the effect where once per turn you can destroy 1 card your opponent controls. And then during the end phase, this card hits a pretty gnarly maintenance cost where you have to send an Iron Core of Koa'ki Meiru from your hand to the graveyard, or just any Koa'ki Meiru monster in order to keep it on the field. So because this card requires you to banish an incredibly specific spell card from your hand just to summon itself, and then requires more resources in order to pay its maintenance cost during the end phase, it didn't really see competitive play in the TCG when it came out. Despite the fact that it does have decent stats with basically the same exact stat line as a Blue Eyes White Dragon. And it could be used once per turn to destroy any card your opponent controls, which is really good. And this is why this card was really good in Duel Links. With the starting life points of only 4,000, this thing could easily destroy one of your opponent's monsters and then just attack directly, only requiring 1,000 more points of damage to finish them off. And it got even better when they released modern Koa'ki Meiru support a few months later, which means they could search out Iron Core of Koa'ki Meiru with Diamond Core of Koa'ki Meiru, or just use Diamond Core to protect it during the end phase to skip the maintenance costs. And thanks to this consistency boost, the 20 card deck, and how strong having a costless targeted destruction in the field was, Koa'ki decks were seeing all kinds of competitive play and were incredibly consistent. Koa'ki Meiru Maximus was legitimately a threatening boss monster, so they hit the Koa'ki cards pretty hard on the ban list and put Koa'ki Meiru Maximus himself limited to 1 copy, which is incredibly rare. They only do this to cards that are considered super strong. Now, this card being put on a limited list was done quite a while ago, so Duel Links players wouldn't be too surprised if it was removed eventually, but this card never really saw any play at all in the TCG. And in fact, non-stun deck variants of Koa'ki Meirus were thought of as a joke in the TCG. So it's really easy to see why this card flew under the radar when they released it with almost full support in Duel Links. And at number 5, we have World Legacy Clash. This is a quick play spell card which allows you to banish one monster you control until the end phase, in order to permanently lower the attack and defense of one of your opponent's monsters by the attack and defense of the monster you banished. So what's really good about World Legacy Clash is that you can use it in response to your opponent trying to destroy one of your monsters in order to temporarily save it, since the monster will return to your side of the field during the end phase. And the attack decrease lasts forever, so it's a great way to greatly nerf one of your opponent's boss monsters that just came out, or for any number of really versatile reasons. It was both a way to protect your monsters and a way to push for game, which is why the card was put to semi-limited pretty quickly after it came out. And since it's a quick play spell card, it can be used during your opponent's turn as well, and with the same benefits as Super Rush Headlong and Windstorm of Etaqua, usable in response to spell and trap card destruction in order to permanently lower the attack of one of your opponent's monsters. And also it can be used to just reset negative effects on your monster, like if it was under the effect of Wall of Disruption or Fiendish Chain. And in the TCG, World Legacy Clash never saw any competitive play because it came out at the beginning of the Link era, where spell and trap cards that help one monster dodging effects is not even worth considering a place in your deck. Even though this card is easily searched out with a plethora of World Legacy support, including the overpowered Synchro monster Ib the World Chalice Justiciar, which was also released at the same time as World Legacy Clash. There was just so much better targets in the TCG to search out that World Legacy Clash was kind of really far down that list of priority. But in Duel Links, this is a pretty powerful staple card to consider as one of your two semi-limited spots. And at number 4, we have Silent Sword Slash. This is a quick play spell card which can only be used on a Silent Swordsman monster you control, where this effect and activation cannot be negated, and allows you to increase the attack and defense of the monster by 1500 permanently, and then grant it an additional temporary effect, where it's immune to your opponent's card effects until the end of the turn. It also has a graveyard effect that allows you to search out a Silent Swordsman monster from your deck. Now in the TCG, this card never saw any competitive play, as it came out in the middle of the Pendulum era, when we had things like ABC Dragonbuster and Cleaforce running around. But in Duel Links, a spell card which grants one of your monsters immunity to card effects for a turn, while also granting them a pretty impressive 1500 attack boost, is very powerful. Effects which grant monsters immunity to card effects are strong even in the TCG, and because they're super strong, they're also very rare, or only grant them temporarily. So this card granting a very high attack point value in addition to immunity was what kind of made it overpowered in Duel Links. There's not much you can really do to counterplay this card since it also specifically prevented negation. So being able to resolve a Silent Sword Slash was essentially paramount to being able to beat over any monster your opponent controls, or just attacking with immunity into a back row of trap cards, or just use to protect your monsters from a form of spell speed 2 disruption, like Karma Cut. The Silent Swordsman cards aren't that great, but with an excellent support card that grants them a good attack boost and immunity for a turn, which also allows you to search with it afterwards, was enough for the card to be kind of a problem in Duel Links. Which is why the card was put on the semi-limited list, which does a pretty good job of restricting a lot of powerful cards and archetypes. Because a lot of staple cards are in the semi-limited list, so it cuts down a lot of other cards that can be played alongside cards like World Legacy Clash, for example. And at number 3, we have Digital Bug Rhinosebus. This is a rank 7 monster which requires 2 level 7 light insect-type monsters as materials, which means this card isn't coming out normally. So its alternative summoning method is that you can detach 2 Xyz materials from a rank 5 or 6 insect-type Xyz monster you control instead, in order to come out on top of that monster. And then it has the effect while it's on the field, where it deals piercing battle damage and has a spell speed 2 Smashing Grounds effect, which allows you to detach one of its materials to destroy a face-up monster your opponent controls with the highest defense. So the way this card is normally brought out is just in any deck that's able to go into rank 6 monsters. They'll use Insector Exabeetle as a material to go into the Digital Bug Rhinosebus. Insector Exabeetle simply just requires any 2 level 6 monsters as materials, and its effect is pretty situational and almost never used, because you need both of its Xyz materials in order to detach in order to go into Rhinosebus. And the reason this card sees so much play in Duel Links is because it has spell speed 2 destruction, in addition to high attack and piercing battle damage. It's actually kind of a beast. The piercing damage actually comes into play quite often, especially with the starting life point value only being at 4,000. And an easy to bring out 2600 attack piercer is pretty decent, in addition to the fact it's able to destroy one of your opponent's strong monsters on spell speed 2. So if your opponent's trying to stall out with some form of a hand monster effect like Battle in Boxer Veil, after the effect triggers you can just use Digital Bug Rhinosebus to destroy the card and then keep attacking for game. Or if your opponent's able to summon a combo piece during their turn, you can just destroy it with its disruption effect. There's very few Xyz monsters or just extra deck monsters in Duel Links with spell speed 2 destruction, and since this card is pretty easy to go into if you're able to go into 2 level 6 monsters, it sees play in pretty much any deck that's able to get out the required materials for Insector Exabeetle. And in the normal TCG, the bug hasn't really seen any competitive play at all, and the only play it did see was in a pure digital bug deck, which is almost not at all how the card is played in Duel Links. It's just a legitimate boss monster to go in over there. And at number 2, we have Arcana Force 14, the Temperance. This is a level 6 monster, which has the effect that when this card is summoned, you get to toss a coin in order to determine which effect it has. If it gets heads, you have all the battle damage you take. If you get tails, you have all the battle damage your opponent takes. Usually Arcana Force monsters have terrible tails effects, and not super good heads effects, so they almost never see competitive play at all. Temperance has an additional effect, however, where if this card is in your hand and you take battle damage, you can discard this card in order to take no battle damage from that battle. So, this effect to prevent battle damage from a single instance of battle damage is not a big deal in the TCG at all, especially when we have super powerful hand traps that can stop entire battle phases, like Battle Fader or Swift Scarecrow. But in Duel Links, they don't really have mass battle stopping hand effects, so the name of the game is singular cards that can stop out one effect, like Sphere Karibo or Battle in Boxer Veil, or Arcana Force 14, the Temperance, since this is a free-to-play option that allows you to prevent one attack from the hand. And because of this, it's actually seen all kinds of play in free-to-play decks, as well as coin toss decks, since it technically has a coin toss effect which is never used. And outside of those two, it's just occasionally played in decks that need high-level monsters for whatever reason, and also want the hand effect to prevent an instance of battle damage. Its effect is actually incredibly useful in Duel Links, as only having 3 monster zones makes a single instance of stopping battle damage a lot more valuable than the TCG with 5 to 7 monster zones available. And the reason I have this card so high on this list is because of just how bad Arcana Force monsters are normally. I just think it's kind of funny that an Arcana Force monster has seen so much competitive play in Duel Links. And at number 1, we have Woodland Sprite. This card has the effect where you can send one equipped card that is equipped to this card to the graveyard in order to inflict 500 points of damage to your opponent. Now, this card never saw any competitive play in the TCG, as that's an incredibly slow way to burn your opponent. You would need some way to recycle and equip a spell card 16 times in order to FTK your opponent with its effect, which is just not happening. Although in Duel Links, with the starting life point value of 4,000, and this card coming out before they have card effects with burn damage, the amount of times it needed to activate the effect drops to only 8. And with cards like Black Pendant being in the game, which deal an additional 500 points of burn damage when it's sent to the graveyard, 3 copies of Black Pendant meant you only needed 2 additional equipped cards, assuming you had a way to search out all 3 copies of Black Pendant. And this was entirely possible when they released the Bamboo archetype into the game. The Bamboo archetype is a small archetype of spell cards revolving around equipped spell cards that are usually played in FTK decks because of how valuable they are at getting ways to activate spell cards in the field or get spells in the graveyard, thanks to Golden Bamboo Sword, which allows you to draw 2 cards, and Cursed Bamboo Sword allowing you to search it out. So the combo would go as follows. You would just need to get Woodland Sprite in the field, then use the Bamboo Engine to draw every card in your deck, and then reset the cards that you didn't need with stuff like Magical Mallet. And Woodland Sprite helped along the Bamboo Engine because it could send Cursed Bamboo Sword to the graveyard in order to inflict 500 points of damage, and then activate Cursed Bamboo Sword's effect in order to search out Golden Bamboo Sword to draw 2 cards. Or another Bamboo Sword card if you needed to have something on the field to use with the combos, since Golden Bamboo Sword does require you to control a Bamboo Sword equipped spell card in order to activate its effect. And so in the process of going through the Bamboo Sword engine, you would be activating Woodland Sprite's effect a couple of times, which easily gives you those extra 2 activations required for the correct amount of burn damage. You could easily burn your opponent for all 4,000 points of damage without getting all 3 copies of Black Pendant, although getting at least 1 copy of them was necessary. And just like in the TCG, FTKs and Duel Links are just as much of a problem, so they're banned almost immediately. Woodland Sprite was put on an emergency ban list where it was limited to 1 copy, as well as them limiting Golden Bamboo Sword. So Woodland Sprite was actually a beast of an FTK machine with the Bamboo Engine, something that wasn't possible at all in the TCG, which is why it was so easy for the card to fly under the radar with the release of the overpowered Bamboo support. Although, to be fair, the Bamboo support has always proven to be strong even in the TCG, so it was kind of on them for not expecting it to be used in some kind of FTK. Alright, and that's the list. Honorable mentions should go out to Sphere Karibo and Cup of Ace, and a whole bunch of other cards I didn't include because I either talk about them too much in other Duel Links related videos, or because they just aren't as notable as the ones on the top 10. So if you think I missed anything more important than the 12 cards I just talked about, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments and why. as well as ideas for future videos just like this one, as this video itself was definitely taken from a previous comment in a video.